The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Because it is not the government of the people any longer. Most people do not understand the Illuminati.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law governs the conduct of nations.
Conspiracy theories.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
A new world order.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
It's the Weekend Vigilante Show.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Weekend Vigilante Show. I am your host, Sheila Zilinsky, joined by my co-host, the one, the only, Dr. Tim Ball. Call-in number to our studios is 347-324-3704, and we may take some calls at the end of the program. What an honor it is today, folks, this March 13th, 2014, to have this guest. I've been a huge fan of this man after reading many of his books, and without a doubt, there is no one on planet Earth that has a better grasp of what is going on. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Daniel Estulin. Daniel is an award-winning investigative journalist and best-selling author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, and the author of 12 books, 5 of them international bestsellers, which have sold over 6 million copies worldwide. He has given 2 speeches at the European Parliament on the Bilderberg Group and the international monetary crisis. In a front-page article, Wall Street Italy called Daniel Estulin one of the few people who understands the current crisis. He was invited by Fidel Castro for a private meeting after Castro read Bilderberg. I could spend the whole hour talking about his impressive credentials, but without further ado, Daniel Estulin, welcome to the program, sir. You are here to talk about your latest book, TransEvolution, The Age of Human Deconstruction.
I wanted to ask you, as an international best-selling author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, what prompted you to write a book about transhumanism?
Actually, the whole experience of working on this book, TransEvolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction, began after the information I received from my sources at the 2005 Bilderberg Conference when they were meeting in Rotterdam on the outskirts of Munich. I received a partial report. It later turned into a secret source document called Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036, which basically was a blueprint, as I realized as I was reading through it, on the future of humanity. And over the last 10 years, I've come across a lot of additional information, other reports such as the Age of Transitions Report, the Global Futures 2045 International Congress, NBIC Conference, which basically integrated humanity with nature, including things like robotics, cybernetics, artificial intelligence, life extensions, brain enhancement, brain-to-brain interactions, virtual reality, genetic engineering, teleportation, human-machine interfaces, neuromorphic engineering, and enhanced human capabilities for defense purposes. So when you get into these reports, and this NBIC report was over 670 pages long, you put it all together, it's like putting together a piece of the puzzle, and you realize that what you're looking at is the blueprint for the future. And just to summarize what I said, we are right now standing at the cusp of the greatest evolutionary change in the history of mankind. What will come out of this evolutionary change over the next very few years, it could be 3, it could be 5, it could be just a little bit longer, but in human terms, it's now basically, will forever change the very definition of what a human being is all about. And in fact, I could tell you definitively that the generation of our children, the kids who are today are 15, 20 years old, they're the last truly human generation of human beings on the planet Earth. Forget the redundancy. Their children, or my grandchildren, there will be transhuman children, there will be post-human children, there'll be cyborgs, there'll be men-machines, or there'll be beings, so we're not totally human as a result of this amazing technologies that's out there, amazing, revolutionary developments in science, such as, for example, synthetic biology, that literally it is in the process of changing our DNA through genetically modified crops. And when you put it all together and you realize, again, that what we're witnessing around us is so absolutely, awe-inspiring and incredible that over the next 30 few years, we will forever change as the species.
Wow.
That's amazing. Daniel, there's hundreds of books in the market already about transhumanism. What new research did you uncover for your new book that the others do not discuss?
I think this is the first book in the world that takes all the elements, such as not only science and technology, but also the economy, population trends, genetics, demand destruction, and explains it in a three-dimensional format. Basically, I create a model, and this model helps us understand how, for example, the things that we're witnessing right now in Detroit, terminology such as demand destruction, deindustrialization, zero growth, wars, be it in the Ukraine, be it in demonstrations in Caracas, Venezuela, or other violent demonstrations around the world in places such as Bangkok, how all of these events are related to what we saw back in the 1990s, with splitting up of the Soviet Union, with the destruction of Yugoslavia, what we're seeing right now in Europe on a level of creating this pan-European Union, which has nothing to do with nation states. Because, again, a lot of the you have to forgive my voice. I've done, I think, over 200 interviews in about 2 weeks. And because this book has literally taken America by storm, and people are reading it and saying, wow, can't believe it's out there. And so, I'm getting weaker and weaker, but I think I have enough, for today's interview, and I did want to be on Sheila's show, obviously, so I'm very, very pleased to be on the show. But as I was saying, all these events that we're seeing around us, from the economy to science to technology to space exploration, singularity, transhumanism, they're not isolated events. It is all related. It's part of the continuum. And it's the first book that literally explains all of these elements together. And when I wrote the Bilderberg book, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, it was kind of easy to understand it because, we've always known that, there are bad guys out there. The financial coup d'etats or the political coup d'etats or, somebody was replaced, by someone else or countries were, being split up into pieces. We always knew that someone was doing this. We just didn't exactly know who was doing it and who these, faceless individuals were. So what I did with Bilderberg is I wrote the book, and suddenly we knew who they were. I had the faces, the names, the documents, the photographs, the deliberation. It was all, neatly explained in one volume. But with this book, TransEvolution, it's different because we're extrapolating all this knowledge into the future. So unlike other books out there, it shows you the very near future and how these tendencies in every field imaginable out there actually converge into this one tendency, which is transhumanism, that the elite are ready to implant or bestow upon us.
What Daniel's talking about is so important because I've experienced this, and I'm like Daniel. I'm a generalist, and we're in a world of specialization, and these things are happening because everybody's got a piece of the puzzle, but we've lost the box top. And in the climate, that was the problem I faced. That there were all these people running around with, I do CO2 and I do methane and I do this, but nobody knew how it all linked together. And what Daniel's doing is taking this work from these very specialized areas, and of course we know from history the British Empire did it, divide and conquer. And so what Daniel's providing is bringing all of this specialized data and linking it together, showing how it links, showing how it's being used by these overarching groups. And it's an enormous service from that point of view.
Just, to expand a bit on what you just said, one of the reasons that people are having a difficult time understanding how, for example, events in Detroit, which looks like a post-apocalyptic bombed-out shell of a city, Caracas, Venezuela, European Union, going to hell in a handbasket, Greece, Ukraine, Russia, Yugoslavia, Thailand, Africa, how all of these events are related together, not just isolated, pockets of control. The reason people don't understand how it works is that most of us have been taught, pretty much kindergarten, that there are two types of policies. There's a foreign policy as there is a national policy. But actually these policies are relevant on a global scale because the presidents of nations have no power whatsoever and the people under them even less power, to speak of. Because there's a third policy which controls the entire world. That's the global policy. And that global policy is defined by the men behind the curtain, the globalists, the elite, call them whatever you want. But the point is that what you see and this is very important to understand, that there's a reason why, the movements that are, such as the transhumanist movement and the idea of space exploration and the idea of, technological advancements are so related to the demand destruction. And just in about 30 seconds, I'd like to explain it because it's very, very important. What we're seeing around us, on the one hand, is the world is literally being destroyed economically. Demand destruction, zero growth, deindustrialization, it's all around us. Detroit is a great example of what is going all over the world, not only in the United States. Now, the reason that they're destroying the world economy, the elite, is because progress and development are directly proportional to population density. If there's progress, there's development, there's going to be more people, mouths to feed. And we've seen this throughout history. We can go back to the Louis XI in France in 1460s, and in one generation, Louis XI literally doubled the population of France. And until 1815, the end of Napoleon, France was the most important nation in the world in every discipline out there. And so the elitists, who obviously understood this right from the very beginning, they know that if there's progress in technological development for all of us, we're going to be not 7, 10, or 20 or 30 billion people, but a lot more. And they don't need that because that's a lot of mouths to feed because we live on a small planet with limited natural resources. So on the one hand, what they're doing is they're destroying the world's economy on purpose, sending all of us to hell in a handbasket. But on the other hand, they're using the gazillions of dollars of their wealth, to develop the technology because it's very expensive to develop these kinds of technologies that we're dealing with today. And these technologies separate that divide between us and them more so than ever. Because, again, if you go kind of back in history, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, the people who controlled knowledge were the high priests, who literally gave it to us, little droplets at a time. Well, in the last 50 years, and last 30 years, we should say, as a result of great revolutions such as quantum revolution, technological revolution, we have suddenly found ourselves in the very same level as all these secret societies who for thousands of years passed their knowledge from one group to another behind closed doors. And suddenly anybody, you or I, or an Indian sitting, an Aborigine sitting in the middle of a outback in Australia, or a Koya Indian sitting on a tree in the middle of an Amazon rainforest in Bolivia with his laptop hooked up to internet, he can Google any term he wants, and he knows as much as any of these secret societies out there. So for the elite, again, to gain the upper hand, they needed to create this divide, and the best way to do this today, with everything we know, is through technology, which is why, again, that's the cornerstone, using Masonic terminology, of the book TransEvolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction, because this, in a very sly and absolutely brilliant manner, the elite are once again getting ready to conquer not only humanity, but the universe itself.
Daniel, it's really incredible. And you've got this very mind-controlled Hollywood, and they've made millions of movies on, obviously like Terminator and Blade Runner. And what's really interesting is now in theaters, just out is the new remake of RoboCop. And it's very interesting because they literally, I saw this show about 2 weeks ago, and they literally take a man's brain and they fuse that around, obviously this cyborg body. It's so incredible, the absolute nefarious overtones in this movie. And, they're really talking about a human brain being overridden by a robotic system. Therefore, because man has emotions, and they don't want that, just this emotionless cyborg. So it's really interesting. Obviously, you see a lot more of this cyborg and man-made machines. This really is our future, though, isn't it?
Well, you've touched on some very interesting points there. Terminator, obviously, that's a great example. We're talking about, Google goggles and augmented reality. There you have the Terminator. Blade Runner, that's another great film. In fact, this Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036, I recommend that people download it today. You can download it for free off of the internet. Just, Google Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036. It's a 91-page report. You'll be just, amazed, awestricken by what you read. So, and in that report, these, the globalists actually call the world of the future the world of Blade Runner. RoboCop, you said, that's another great film as far as understanding how the technologies work. In Hollywood, of course, it's very important to pay attention to what Hollywood is putting out as far as technological films, because Hollywood is controlled by the same people who control the world, and it's a great way to program, the reality and of the near future. But there's tons of films out there. G.I. Joe 2. and there's a lot, using all the development from the world of nanotechnology. Prototype, that film hasn't come out yet, but they're talking in it about singularity and Ray Kurzweil. Transcendence, that's a film coming out, I think, in about a week or two, with Johnny Depp, where he is, in this film, plays the role of the world's most famous transhumanist, visionary futurist, and he's killed, or he's mortally wounded by a terrorist anti-tech group, and he's dying. They decide to upload his brain onto the computer, and his brain tries to take over the world. That's a very interesting film as far as the transhumanist movement. Gattaca, that was a great film with Jude Law, where they're talking about what we see around us right now, synthetic biology. Public Enemy with Will Smith, that's a great film, talking about NSA spying on us. I Am Legend, another film with Will Smith, where he was talking about the viruses. Moon, I don't know if you guys seen Moon. That was an amazing film, low budget, but worth seeing, about mining on the moon by cyborgs. Minority Report, Avatar, the other film, Elysium, which is basically, again, how the Strategic Trends Report foresees the future. Video games like Deus Ex, that's a Canadian company out of Montreal. Deus spelled D-E-U-S, and the second world is E-X, where they're describing this world of neo-humanity, and transhumanism. But, of course, there's other stuff out there as well. Fox has a new series out called Almost Human. I don't know if you're aware of that series. That's seeing about one of the main characters, a cyborg cop. An important role in that film, just to continue with what you were saying before, Sheila, is the role of neuroscience, which is the study of the nervous system. And today, with the advances in chemistry, computer science, engineering, medicine, neuroscience also includes the study of molecular, cellular, structural, evolutionary, computational, and also medical aspects of the nervous system. So what we're looking at is this quantum leap in the development process of technology. Technology itself is an amazing thing, and we need technology. We need a lot of technology, and it's our calling as human beings to be able to discover all these technologies, because, of course, they have to be used for the betterment of humanity. If we start using the technologies to hurt people or subjugate us, needless to say, that's something we have to do everything in our power to oppose.
Is the fountain of youth becoming a cyborg? Is that what we're setting all our young people up with, these programs that you put the idea into their heads that this is perfectly normal development and progress, so that will become then the fountain of youth, that people will live forever and be in control, when in fact the opposite's true, that they're not in control at all. Is that what we're seeing?
I think it's the way how they understand fountain of youth and immortality, because to us immortality, to a lot of people, is the idea of crossing ourselves many times over than with being good people on the planet Earth, and we die, our soul goes to heaven. That may be so. I don't know. Nobody ever came back and told me this is how it works. When I was with Fidel Castro, back in August 2010, I said to him, Comandante, how do you understand immortality? And he started talking to me about, all kinds of, nonsense, Marx and Lenin and, communism, and, and he kind of stopped because he knew he was making a fool of himself. And so he said, well, how do you understand it? I said, I think the idea of immortality is the survival of our species, which means that we need to colonize space. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But, the elitists understand immortality different, because they don't care what they look like physically. It's not the point of, having long hair or, having wrinkles or being old and having, skin which isn't, soft. They don't care about, the physical appearance itself. To them, the idea of immortality is being able to upload or download yourself, your consciousness, onto a computer, merge that consciousness, with billions of other people, what they call hive mind, and we already have a version of hive mind. It's called cloud. And instead of uploading files, in the future we'll be able to upload our consciousness. So to them, that's the idea of the fountain of youth. Now, there's a lot of this kind of technology, which is, again, fascinating, and it's absolutely inevitable, and I repeat, inevitable, that cybernetic enhancement of human performance is going to come whether we like it or not. So, again, because it's the ultimate human-machine symbiosis, would literally be to download the actual copy of our brain into the supercomputer. And, of course, the whole business of, being able to enhance ourselves, passes through being able to decode and understand very complex systems in our bodies. And the most complex system in our bodies, needless to say, our brain. And, it's the driving force behind the human performance. And needless to say, when you can decode it, and the transhumanists are convinced And if you listen to Ray Kurzweil, who's the engineering, genius behind, Google Tech and one of the greatest inventors of the 20th century, and a poster boy, for the transhumanist movement, they're absolutely convinced that by 2035 they'll be able to, upload or download our consciousness onto an avatar of our choosing. But the ideas of these augmentations, aside from the fact that we're talking about literally changing the very essence of humanity, there will be a huge business for the corporations, and that's something that people also have to keep in mind. It's true that for years, for decades now, we've been integrating ourselves with technologies, artificial hearts, bionic eyes, limbs which aren't ours, but it's come to the point where people will be literally changing their perfectly functional body parts for upgraded applications the same way as we change our telephones, our cars, or whatever other, gadgets we have out there. It's just a question of how, easily the media and the press and, the peer pressure and the social media will be able to push these ideas. And just as well as I know, that, people, they will believe what you want them to believe as soon as you put it on television. And if your reality is different from their, from the television reality, most people will simply adjust their reality to the TV's reality, and everything is fine. But again, all these concepts, on the one hand, they're fascinating because we'll be able to, save millions of lives. But all this stuff,
sure,
it comes at a price. Because to have these upgraded applications, to have these, body parts, augmentations in us, we're going to have to take drugs for the rest of our lives to make sure that these augmentations work. And these drugs, they're dangerous, they're addictive, and they're very expensive. And if we don't take these drugs, our bodies will be made to reject these augmentations. And needless to say, the elitists will have their technology in us, and they will have the power to turn off our limbs, the potential to turn off our eyes, send messages to our brain, and control the very thoughts as if they have the power of God. And this is something that, again, when you start extrapolating what I talk about in the book into the near future, you realize these are very serious issues which we need to deal with. And unfortunately, because people, for the most part, I'd say 99% of the world's citizenry simply are tech very, very not savvy. Okay, they simply don't understand just how close we are, to this cutting-edge technological changes within us.
Daniel, you absolutely touched on so many good points, and just kind of springboarding into the genetic engineering, we're talking about control of nature, redesigning it, rebuilding it. You just said the phrase playing God, and that comes up in almost every conversation about genetic engineering. There's no longer, this really isn't the stuff of science fiction anymore. Your personal opinion, Daniel, do you think anything good can come from this genetic engineering?
It can, needless to say, because again, technology is powerful and can be used to help us. But then again, if we extrapolate what we know about the way the elitists work from our knowledge of how they've done things in the past and in the present, we have to obviously understand that doubtfully they'll use the technology to save humanity. They'll most certainly use technology, to harm us or to control us or to make sure that they have the advantage. And one of the examples, I talked earlier about Gattaca, the film itself, which was an amazing film. If people haven't seen it, they should. In one of the biggest breakthroughs in recent history, scientists have created a synthetic genome that can literally self-replicate. What they've done is they've taken a cell and they've modified the genes of a cell by inserting DNA from another organism. And so the bacteria replicated itself, and in the process, it created a second generation of the synthetic DNA. And this synthetic organism will do exactly not what nature tells it to do, but what scientists tell it to do. So, this technology has literally taken us across a threshold. It's a turning point and a marking of coming of age of a new science called synthetic biology, founded on the ambition that one day, very, very soon over the next couple of years, we'll be able to design and manufacture a human being in a laboratory. In other words, you can get a DNA, anything here on Earth, and create organisms that never before existed entirely from non-living materials. So basically, scientists are creating new life, and at the same time, we're creating life forms that the human immune system and the world has never so far experienced. So we don't know how it will act and react with nature. We don't know if we extrapolate this into the near future what will happen to our race. We don't know when you start mixing, men, machines, and men, or these newly, genetically modified immune systems with people who are mortals. We don't know what kind of beings we're going to be creating in the process, and it raises very important questions about life itself. In other words, what is the meaning, definition of humanity? And then when you start, looking at this technology and extrapolating it into the future, you're dealing with some very, very heavy issues. For example, look at children, okay? Now, if you have, again, like in the film Gattaca, if you have parents and who have a child, well, you can literally create, elect, or select a child and build their characteristics as you're building,
so it's like,
a Lego.
It's like designer's sperm, really, the movie Gattaca, wasn't it?
Exactly. It's an amazing film. People should see it just to understand how real this is. We're literally creating a new breed of children. Not to mention, we're mixing in other people's DNA with the couples to literally produce a new breed of humans. And again, this is in the future. A couple of weeks ago, the periodicals all over the world were talking about 30 couples who had other people's DNAs mixed in with their children's DNA, with their DNA, to create a first child where there's DNAs from 3 different people, form part of a human being. But there's a darker side to all of these things we also have to consider. You take people like you and I, or you take criminals, or you take, parents who misbehave, dissidents, those of us who think differently from the official party line of one world state. Well, we could have our children's DNA altered during pregnancy as punishment for our non-obedience. And what's more, and I said it before, by changing or altering our DNA, the corporations and governments, they can create a society without memory. People whose life's experiences are stored on a memory drive running on a 1-week cycle through modified DNA over and over and over and over and over again. So when you get to that point, you don't need history, you don't need knowledge, you don't need photography, you don't need pictures, you don't need anything whatsoever, because again, everything you will be doing or will have done, it will have been erased after a 1-week cycle. And this is how you create, what Huxley's called, again, scientific dictatorship without tears.
Daniel, I'm glad you mentioned Huxley, because that takes me back, because I read a lot on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who, of course, is essentially the founder of the modern environmentalism, as people see it, and, of course, the opposition by Voltaire and the debates that they had over these issues. But one of the things I'm struggling with, and I suspect some of our listeners, we're talking about evolution, natural evolution, but what we're talking about is humans taking control of that. And then you seem to be suggesting that we need to control those few that are controlling that evolution. But how do we do that? Unless we all become of equal abilities and talents, there's always going to be the leaders and the followers. I think it's why Ardrey wrote a follow-up to Rousseau's Social Contract, in which he talked about alpha and omega people, within an animal group, that there were the leaders and the followers. And so, how do we get control if you want to have the followers in control? That seems to contradict the whole evolutionary idea. So, I find this all very confusing.
First of all, the whole idea of followers and leaders, it's in a world of, that I understand as the world of humanity, these kinds of divisions shouldn't exist. The greatest natural resource on the planet Earth isn't oil or gas. It's the creative capacity of, it's our mind. It's the creative capacity of 7 billion people working together to discover universal principles of nature which improve the lives of everybody on the planet per square kilometer of space against nature. It's our divine spark of reason which separates us from everything else and everyone else out there. And because each generation of humanity should be an improvement over the preceding generation, not in terms of one or two, groups of people, but in terms of humanity in general, in terms of power, in terms of understanding, in terms of culture. Because then mankind has a sense of a dynamic moving forward from generation to generation. But today we don't have this because we're part of a no-future society. And the reason is, again, all you need to do is look at the education system. again, outcome-based education, which is the vicious suppression of creative powers of reason, these distinctly human mental capabilities expressed typically in the form of valid, axiomatic, revolutionary discoveries in physical science. Now, the proper purpose of education, and this is something that Voltaire and company never understood, is not to prepare the young for some predetermined social status in adult life. The only moral purpose of education is to develop an entire population up to the level of scientific and moral knowledge necessary not only to perpetuate society at no less than its present level of power in the universe, but to carry the process of development of the whole population a step forward. We don't have this system because the system that's in control is the empire, which is not a king or a queen sitting on a gold-plated throne. These are, above kings. It's a system of control. So again, it's a moral problem, a problem of mankind's destiny. And every generation, we have to advance beyond that of the preceding generation, and that hope that will happen for everybody on the planet Earth, what should be on the mind of a person who is dying of the old age, that their life has meant something because it laid the foundation for a better life than they knew for the rest of humanity. And that's what I try to explain to Castro when I talk about the idea of immortality.
Okay, now what you're talking about here is very different than what is being taught in universities and in schools and so on with regard to evolution. Because Darwin before I go to Darwin, one of the things I've noticed with human advancement, and that's what we're talking about, was the transition from us being passive recipients of what nature handed out to us to becoming active in controlling it. I mean, if you think about, for me, the great what the anthropologist lists as the great advances in humanity, for example, are overcoming the fear of fire to put fire to our advantage where it could allow greater diet, cook foods and stuff, but also to allow us to live in colder regions than we would normally be able to live with without the fire. And then clothing is another climate control issue, irrigation, another. But the transition from being passive to nature to active to nature is one part of it. But the Darwin evolution thing is still based upon that our genes are passively adjusting to changes in the environmental condition. What you seem to be implying is that we're in the next phase of shift to active creating the genes that we want for the society. So it seems to leave Darwin behind. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
No, absolutely. Darwin doesn't even enter into this picture. You see, when we build infrastructure, if you're talking about fire, if you're talking about cities, if you're talking about development of mankind, when we build infrastructure, we're actually reorganizing the physical space-time of the biosphere, allowing it to attain higher and higher levels of energy flux density. And like all feats of human creativity, because that's what we are, creative, it's not a project designed for immediate consumption. It's a project designed to extend man's sense of self far beyond the confines of our sense perceptions and feelings of personal well-being and connect us instead to the generations which will continue our legacy long, long after our generation has left the planet Earth.
Well, Daniel, what's interesting, though? I mean, I was thinking as you guys were talking about, these mad scientists already, they're sitting in these labs creating God knows what, and particularly Frankenfood. They're playing God in these laboratories. And in your book, you link how corporate giants like Monsanto and obviously Cargill and Archer Daniels have become household names. I want you to talk a little bit. I mean, who gave these guys permission to play God? I mean, why are these mega corporations and a small socio-political elite allowed to own our food and control the very basis of human survival? Because without food and water, obviously, I mean, you control the resources, you control people, hey?
Well, from the globalist point of view, they feel that 7 billion is a lot of people. And if you listen to people like, Bill Gates and Al Gore and all these degenerates, the idea is to reduce the world's population, to a much more manageable number. But again, what we want, not fewer, but more people. We want to get to 20, 30, 50, 100 billion people, because that's 100 billion minds working together to discover universal principles of nature, and we need that. It doesn't mean that we all have to live on the planet Earth, because there's going to come a point very, very soon that mankind, because that's our destiny, we're going to have to immigrate. We have to conquer the galaxies, because if you extrapolate us, a million years from now, we're not going to be here. It's our calling to conquer the galaxies. That said, if you're the elitist, you want to reduce the population. How do you reduce population? You can kill people in wars, or you can have disease. You can have, obviously, starvation, and that's one of the best ways to kill people off is through starvation. And in order to starve people to death, what they're trying to do is take control of our food production away from independent farmers and put it into the hands of giant corporations subservient to the interests of one world company limited. And again, one of the things I've done in this book, TransEvolution, I've done quite an extensive research on all the corporations that basically run the world food supply. And you could pretty much count them on two hands. There are about 10 to 12 companies: Cargill Continental, Louis Dreyfus, Bunge & Born, Andre, Archer Daniel Midland. These are complete corporations that completely dominate everything related to food, not only cereals and grains, but meats, dailies, oils, fats, fruits, vegetables, sugar, spices, and everything else. And although these corporations, they maintain the legal fiction of being different organizations, in reality, it's one interlocking syndicate with a common purpose and multiple overlapping board of directors.
There was a book written called, I think it was The Merchants of Grain, wasn't it, that talked about the 5, and it was private families that owned these corporations. Cargill, I know, Merchants of Grain, the power and profits of the 5 giant companies at the center of the world's food supply.
That's right.
And so that's what you're talking about. This is a very interesting part to me, Daniel, because it goes back to who's in control. I remember when they were splitting up Pakistan, there was West and East Pakistan, and East Pakistan wanted to become Bangladesh, and it eventually did. But the West Pakistan Army, before they left, took 200 people outside of Dhaka and murdered them. And somebody said that was the brains trust of Bangladesh, would set them back 50 years in terms of development. That strikes me as a very good analogy to what you're talking about. Is that fair to say?
I think this kind of genocide, especially if you go back, as you mentioned earlier, the British Empire, which are very avid genocidalists going back. You can Irish potato famine. No, that was full-blown hunger created by the British. Or you're talking about the India or any other part of the world. It's needless to say these people are very, very good and have been for the past 300-plus odd years of getting rid of just the right people to make sure that there is no such thing as progress and development in society.
It was interesting because I remember at that time, and I was teaching a course in political geography, and there were 2 corporations that effectively controlled Canada. There's the Power Corporation and the Argus Corporation.
Right.
One controls Western Canada, the other Eastern Canada. They announced that they were going to combine. Of course, the Canadian Combines Act or against these kinds of mergers that were not good for the greater good of the people were not very strong. But the government said, well, we're going to investigate whether we're going to allow this or not. They decided they needed 22 experts to investigate this merger. They found they couldn't find 22 experts in Canada who didn't, in one way or another, work for one or two of the corporations. And what it brought home to me was how few people actually run anything. Talk about the Merchants of Grain, or we talk about any country, the brains trust, if you, for want of a better term, is a surprisingly small number of people. And I guess that was the point I was making about with Bangladesh. And so how do we get around
families,
that?
There's about 300 families out there who control pretty much all the levels of power. And again, when we're talking about levels of power, I don't mean presidents of the United States or prime ministers of Canada, because these people are absolutely irrelevant. Let me just give you an example. You were talking about Canada. Well, if you go back to 1995 and the Quebec referendum and that whole thing that luckily we won, and I played a big part actually in that, getting the information from my Bilderberg sources at the Bilderberg conference in King City, getting that out into the media, and actually I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people came out across Canada to say no to this. But then over the next 3 years, between 1996 and 1999, I started investigating and to see actually who was behind this entire movement, because the way I got into Bilderberg, and I guess this is kind of a funny story, is in 1992 I was in Toronto because my family lives in Toronto, and I was having dinner at a Spanish restaurant called Segovia on Yonge Street with a friend of mine who was a son of a counterintelligence officer who was an old friend of my grandfather's. And this individual, let's just call him, Victor, for the sake of calling him something, as he was having his mashed potatoes and rabbit, he told me that in 1995 Canada was going to be split up into French and English-speaking Canada, and that some unknown extremist party is going to become the second leading party in Canada, and one of the main traditional parties are going to be completely wiped out. And I said to him, well, why are they doing this? And she said, because some very important people in Washington needed to balance their books. And I kind of looked at him and I thought, this guy is insane, which is how most people look at us when we talk about these kinds of things. And then when 1995 came around, and suddenly, you had the Reform Party, and you had all these, the Parti Québécois, and suddenly all these companies and people and names who we've never heard of before appeared front and center on the stage. And as this man predicted 3 years before that, the Conservatives were completely wiped out. The most hated man in Canada, which was Chrétien, became the Prime Minister of the country. And the entire Canada was about to be split up into two. And then when we were able to save Canada as a nation, and I started investigating, I realized that behind all of this was the Power Corporation and David Rockefeller. And when I looked at the names who are all interlinked amongst themselves, I realized just how, deep the rabbit hole went. For example, John Ray, at the time he was a leading strategist for Chrétien in the elections, and he was also executive vice president of Power Corp and Paul Desmarais' right-hand man. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, what am I getting into? Bob Ray, Rhodes Scholar and ex-NDP party, Premier Ontario, who appointed Maurice Strong to the chairmanship of Ontario Hydro, which he proceeded to dramatically downsize, as Bilderberg first discussed back in the 1996 meeting. Then you have Paul Martin, former federal prime minister for the Liberals, who substituted Jean Chrétien, and he rose to the ranks at what company? Power Corporation. And he too attended Bilderberg in 1996. Jean Chrétien, whose daughter, France, is married to André Desmarais, that's the son of Paul Desmarais, chairman of Power Corp. Mitchell Sharp, who as finance minister brought Chrétien into politics, and since 1981 Sharp was the vice president for David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission. Daniel Johnson, former leader of the Quebec Liberal Party and Quebec Premier in 1994, and he rose to the ranks of what company? You guessed it, Power Corporation. A lawyer lobbyist for Power Corporation. Mike Harris, former Premier of Ontario, close friend of George W. Bush, and Paul Martin. And Harris, like his colleague Ralph Klein, former Premier of Alberta, is also a member of the Bilderberg Party. So you have the Conservative Party via Mulroney, you have the Liberals via Chrétien, and the NDP via Ray, are all tightly connected to Paul Desmarais and the Power Corporation. And the Power Corp is the leading Canadian representative of the Bilderberg Group. So when you start, unwinding all of these corporations, names, and people who control the levers of power, you realize that, again, presidents and prime ministers do not decide anything, because the policy is decided on a global level, not national or international.
Interesting. It's just really interesting. You mentioned Maurice Strong, of course, Club of Rome, and, isn't it our responsibility to bring about deindustrialization? And springboarding into that, Daniel, we can see that there is a globally orchestrated financial meltdown right now in the United States. You look at what's happening right now, the inflation, and then you got Janet Yellen in the Fed. Bernanke 2.0 in a skirt. She's really, it's complete Keynesianism, and you can see a lot of things going on. So when you look at all this happening economically, this is by design, isn't it? Economy.
Well, for example, when I hear people say, Barack Obama is really doing a poor job, I laugh. Barack Obama is doing exactly what he's paid to do.
Exactly what he's told.
The people who put them in power, they spend a lot of money to put that man in power. And he's going to do, once he's in power, exactly what they want him to do. And the same goes for the education. It's simply unfathomable, if you think about it, that the United States government spends almost $90 billion on education per year. And the result of that $90 billion is you have 25% of Americans who don't know that such a little planet, such as our planet Earth, actually revolves around the sun and not the other way around. And people say, ha, 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 it's really funny. But actually, the government is getting exactly what they paid for. Because if the government, be it American, Canadian, or whichever government, wanted things done differently, they would squeeze every droplet of sweat out of your body, and they'll make you give them exactly what they paid for. And if they pay $90 billion and they get what they get, it's because they want this. Because, again, as I said earlier, outcome-based education is the contrary, to classical Platonic and Socratic education, abstract thinking, which is what one needs if we are to be human beings. And if you don't want to be a human being and want to be a degenerate, then you have to follow exactly the education system which has been installed in Canada, in the United States, in Spain, in every country out there, because they don't want us to think for ourselves. They want to make sure we do what they tell us to do.
It's a very fine line, isn't it? Because they know they need a reasonably educated workforce to do the technologies and the advances that are going on, and yet they know the minute they educate people, they'll start asking questions. And how do you balance between that? One of the things that I think is important, Daniel, for me, is that teaching, I taught a science credit for art students. It was supposed to teach art students how science works, the scientific method, and so on. But 80% of the students are terrified of numbers, and only 20% are comfortable with science or lab courses or at all. And what I've seen in my experience is these mathematical whizzes are perfect foils for these people that want to take control of the science, because that's really what's critical here. They're almost like robots themselves. You could argue that they're savants, that they're brilliant at mathematics but have no humanity at all. So, and I've watched this in climate. It's the climate modelers that can play all these mathematical games that fell prey to the politicians that wanted to use climate and the sky is falling syndrome to take control of people with one world government. So they don't worry about the vast majority of people. It's just that one narrow group that has particular talents that they need.
It's actually very easy to. There's no conspiracy. Again, it's a lot of the things that we discuss. With Bill Liberg, or you have some pretty crazy conspiracy theories out there. But Bill Liberg is not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy reality. You have. No group exists, I don't care how powerful they are, that sits in a dark room holding hands, staring at a crystal ball, planning the world's domination. The world is a very complex place. So anybody who believes this kind of nonsense, it simply doesn't, it has a few loose screws in their head. It's very easy to do and get away with what these people get away with. You get brilliant scientists who go to, fantastic schools, who have incredible knowledge in their disciplines. And most of these people, they're not part of any conspiracy at all. They're just brilliant at what they do. And they have access, for example, to working on post-grad courses, seminars, investigative works with some of the most brilliant minds in America or the world. They have an opportunity to go to seminars across the world, form part of think tanks, foundations, non-governmental organizations. They get bonuses from government, but not because they're part of some, crazy, geezer-like conspiracy. It doesn't work like that. You don't need that. Yeah. A lot of these people, they're just brilliant at what they do, and they want to keep advancing. Who do you think they're going to work with? Somebody who cleans their toilet, 3 times a week, or somebody who is a space scientist, a futurist, or people such as, a theoretical astrophysicist like Michio Kaku. Who would you rather be with, Michio Kaku or a guy who cleans your toilet? I'd rather be with Michio Kaku. So the point is that it's very easy when you get these people together, and as you said, it's a narrow group when you compare it to the rest of the world's population. But the point is that you get what you pay for, and you pay for knowledge. and they work on that knowledge, they discover these principles, and then again, it's who gets these principles and what they do with them. That's the matter that actually changed, the equation itself.
Well, that's back to my earlier point about specialization and generalization. And all of these people are very specialized, and as long as you fund them and you let them associate with a small group of people, they'll produce whatever you want and not give thought to it. But at what point does the individual have a responsibility to the greater society? And for the longest time, and I used to have seminar discussions with my students about this, how could somebody sit in a lab and design landmines that they knew were going to indiscriminately kill women and children? How do you turn off your humanity to be able to do that? And I think Lair, the mathematician from Harvard who wrote all those songs, and he had that story about Wernher von Braun. They said, look, your rockets are indiscriminately killing women and children, and Lair has him say, well, I fire them up. Where they come down is somebody else's responsibility. And so at what point does the individual become subsumed, or do they even think about it?
That's a good question. I think most people, again, it's what you do with the technology itself. Look at nuclear energy, for example. You can use nuclear energy to kill, a great number of people, or you can use nuclear energy for as a source of energy, which is a much better source of energy than anything out there until you actually get to the moon. You get to to the planets, and you start using and mining helium-3 isotope, which you can use as the next step in the energy development, which is fusion and fission. But the point is, again, it's how these technologies are going to be used. Because if you actually go back and kind of look at humanity over the last 100,000 years. Look, 100,000 BC, stone tools. 4,000 BC, we discovered the wheel. Okay? 9th century, gunpowder. 15th century, the printing press. That was a big game changer. The 19th century, we had the light bulb. And then, in the 20th century, we had the cars, television, nuclear weapons, spacecraft, internet, and now we have biotech, nanotech, fusion, fission, space travel. In the next 50 years, we'll be able to create cybernetic individuals who will be completely indistinguishable from us. And they call this period the epoch of cybernetic immortality. And the point is, again, it all depends on what you're going to do with all this technology, because technology itself is amazing. We need it. We must have it in every one of its manifestations, because it is the only thing that will allow us to improve the lives of everybody per square kilometer of space against nature, be it here on the planet Earth or be it out there. Because as you know, in the next 3.5 years, Mars One, that's a Dutch private corporation. And then in 2023, that's like 9 years from now, the Russians and the European Space Agency, they're sending a manned mission to Mars. One-way trip. And these pioneers are going to go to Mars. They're going to say goodbye to the planet Earth and to humanity, and they're going to start building the next level of human evolution, on the planet Earth, on the planet Mars, and then also, obviously, on the moon. And the idea is that they, using the technology that we have and we will be developing in the near future, will be, winning per square kilometer of space against nature, on this case, the universe, for the betterment of humanity. And that is a first step for mankind's, future immortality. Again, if you use that technology, just like as you use nanotechnology to kill people, obviously it's something that should never be done. But that's the moral issue, a moral fiber of society. And to actually do that, we have to understand who we are as people and what is our calling and why we're here on this planet Earth.
We've got about 10 minutes to wrap it up. And, of course, look at the way that, these super elites are controlling us, dumbing us down, brainwashing us, influencing us. All our communications are being monitored. They predict even, thought crime police predicting our future behavior. Really, there's some really shocking examples you provide in your book, but essentially nothing that happens in our world is accident. It's all part of this grand plan, isn't it, Daniel? Is there any hope left in our world? And how would you tell our listeners can we do about this to stop this control? Because it seems like the humans are just weak puppets in the theater of life created by these super illuminous elite.
I don't think it's really that simple, and I don't think it's if had it been that simple, they would have the elitists would have had their control a long time ago, because you don't need to have a lot of them. You just need have key individuals in important positions of power. You have one who is the president of the United States. You have one who is the president of the Federal Reserve. You have one who is the president of Goldman Sachs, and you get a few of these in the United States, a few of them in Canada, a few of them in England. You have international organizations like International Monetary Fund, World Bank, etc. You have a few commissioners and presidents of the European Commission. You have pretty much the entire world covered. Then you get a few puppets out there in South America, and then those who don't, do what they have to, you kill them, or you start regional wars, you get over their territories. But again, there's no conspiracy here. It's just, it's been this way for 6,000 years. And again, if you go back to ancient Egypt, back in 6,000 years ago, you had, the Nile and a very small swath of land which was fertile around the edges of the Nile, and the rest was the desert. And so these high priests way back then, realized that they couldn't go to war to win territories because eventually they're going to get all of them going to get killed. So they figured out another way to do this. And that's, the cultural warfare that we see right now today. And the people who organized those wars way back 6,000 years ago in Egypt, today, if you kind of, expand that trajectory from then to now, they're the same people who today live in Switzerland, who today live in Holland and in England, which is called the Venetian black nobility, which are the base, who are the forefathers, the forerunners to what's today called Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, all these other organizations, which are just conveyor belts. But again, it's not that easy, because what we have and what makes us special, we have this thing called divine spark of reason. And this is an intrinsically human capability to discover universal principles of nature. And we have that, and nobody else does. So we can, as people, intrinsically, overcome anything, because intrinsically people are good. And we know the difference between good and bad. And that's something, somehow, we don't know how, has been instilled within us, ever since we were born, or ever since the beginning of humanity. Which is why most people are repelled by death, by suffering, by watching others suffer. We don't like to see others suffer. Only a few degenerates and psychopaths like to see people suffer. Most of humanity, we don't. And no matter how hard they work, and this is again where these elements such as genetic engineering, synthetic biology come in, because if you can play around, with our genes, maybe you can create people who have no memory, people who have no emotions, or people whose emotions you can easily control. And this is again a very important part of what's actually being done today in these different fields. But there are a lot of elements out there which help us, balance the field. And internet is obviously one of them. And, you and I are talking over the phone, or we could be talking over Skype. And in 2 seconds, as soon as our interview is over, and you put it online, via Skype or via Twitter, somebody in Australia, sending it to his friend in Japan, who's sending it to his brother in Vancouver, and that brother in Vancouver sending it to his girlfriend in Argentina. In less than, 10 seconds, the entire world had the opportunity to hear us talk about this, which is, again, when people talk about internet, or the elitists want to, take internet away from us, they don't want to take it away from us at all, because here comes the other. Again, it's always a double-edged sword. Technology is great, but again, how depends how you use it. Internet is great, but depends what we do with it. Elitists, it's dangerous for them because we have the power of empowerment, if you want to say it this way. But on the other hand, through internet, they know exactly what we're doing at every moment of the day, and they know through trending topics, through Twitter conversations, through Google conversations, through anything we do on the internet. They have the ultimate big picture, so they can always, using their social scientists and social engineering, create systems which will always be in their favor. So again, it's always, everything we do is double-edged sword, and I'm not that sure and convinced that these people are going to win, because I think intrinsically we, the people, have this amazing power to survive and rise above ourselves, to correct, the bad that has been done to us.
Absolutely, Daniel.
Yeah. Isn't the danger that we don't know what's being done to us? Isn't that where the problem comes? That it's in the secrecy? To the old biblical thing, the devil's work is done in the darkness. It's
true to a certain extent, but again, look, there's 1 billion people out there. So let's just play with numbers. 1 billion people who have a smartphone, and smartphone technology is more sophisticated than anything that NASA had 50 years ago when they sent Apollo to the moon. So that's 1 billion people who have everything, their entire lives are in their telephones. So they read the news, be it Chatter, be it, Google, be it Yahoo, be it whatever social services you want. But, they're always connected, and we always know what's going on. And to be able to make people disconnect them, it's going to be virtually impossible. So people may not know enough, but they certainly know enough, to be able to say, hey, this is being done to us, which is, again, one of the reasons why outright killing us is not a good idea, because we'll figure it out sooner or later. That's why they're creating so many other technologically advanced methodologies, to be able to get, again, the upper hand on humanity. But it's very, very, very expensive. And, again, these expenses, as of now, they haven't been able to justify them just yet.
Well, Daniel, I want to say, first of all, incredible book. This TransEvolution is absolutely incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, get your hands on Daniel's new book, TransEvolution, The Age of Human Deconstruction. It really does describe the change of the paradigm for humanity, and, it's talking about our future existence. And, Daniel, again, all your books are incredible. Your work is remarkable. You're really a big inspiration on why I got into this particular radio show, and I just want to tell you that I'm such a huge fan. And again, everyone, I'd like you to go to DanielEstulin.com. That's Daniel, ESTULIN.com. And I hope you'll come back and join us soon, Daniel. Really incredible work.
Yeah.
Anytime you want, I'll be there.
Yeah, thank you for extending your voice to us. That we really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure.